Okay, so we have a broken flip-flop or something going on with the flip-flop that we don't understand yet. So first we'll talk about how the flip-flop works, and then go back to the board to try to fix it. So if you look on that web page, the outerworldapps.com/PDP-8V, about a third the way down or so, it shows the little schematic, a gate diagram of the D flip-flop. And that came from the TI 7474 data sheet. And I don't know if it came before that or not, but anyway, there it is. And it's basically three set reset flip-flops made out of NAND gates. So I will draw three set reset flip-flops here on this piece of paper, and hopefully you can follow along. So there's the A, B, C, D, E, F gates. At least that's what I called them. I labeled them A, B, C, D, E, F, and each pair makes one of these three flip-flops. Okay, so I'll call this one the AB one, CD, and EF. So those are each, AB is a NAND gate, and C and D are each NAND gates, and E and F are each NAND gates. And those are, you can see how they're hooked together to make little set reset flip-flops. So now the D flip-flop is, merely hooking these set reset flip-flops together. So we'll draw the Q output here, or actually the Q bar output here of that one, and the Q output of this one like that. And we'll do the same here. I'm going to put the Q bar on top here, and the Q output here. Now on this EF is the output flip-flop for the whole thing. And let's see. One of these is the set. I think this is the set one. No, this is the reset one. We want the reset one here. Reset one goes here. And the set one goes here. Now, because they're NAND gates, the set input and reset inputs are active low. So if these both are high, then the flip-flop just stays, the output just stays the way it is, right? So what you do is you take the Q bar of these two guys and hook them up to the set and resets of these, right? So that goes like that. Okay, set and reset. So that means that if this CD flip-flop is, activated, that it will cause the EF flip-flop to go to a 1 state, right? Oh yeah, we can put the Q and not Q on here. Q, not Q outputs. And these are your main D flip-flop outputs. So if this flip-flop here becomes activated, right, its Q output will go low and go over here to the S input here on this guy here. Maybe I can zoom this in better. Video capture, configure, and zoom it in a little bit here. Zoom. Oh yeah, there you go. All right, okay. So again, so here's how the flip-flops are connected, how the gates are connected up in this D flip-flop. Okay, so you have this flip-flop here. If this thing gets activated, then its Q output will go low and cause the output flip-flop to flip to a 1. So we can call this the 1 input flip-flop, okay? Likewise, if this one here would be activated, its Q output would go low, or its Q bar output would go low and make a 0 come out of our flip-flop. So we'll call this one the 0 guy. Okay. Now, what are the inputs to these things? So each of these has a set and reset input. So we'll put the sets on the outside and the resets on the inside. That will make it easier to explain a little later. Reset and set. And again, because these are made of NAND gates, the set and reset inputs are all active low. Okay. Now what they do next is connect these reset inputs to the clock. So here's your clock input. Now the thing to notice about the clock is whenever the clock is low, okay, it's going to reset this thing and reset this thing, which means it will hold these Q outputs high regardless of what happens to the set inputs, because we know these are cross-coupled NAND gates in here. That's how it's actually implemented. So we know that as long as the clock input is low, okay, it's going to force these Q bar outputs to be high, which means this will not change because this is high and this is high, and these are active low inputs. So this set reset flip-flop here will hold steady as long as the clock is low. Whenever that clock is low, these outputs do not change. Okay, which is what you want with a D flip-flop, right? As long as the clock is low, the output should not change, right? Okay, so now the data input comes in here. All right, so there goes your data input. And actually, through a little trickiness, you don't actually need to provide inverted data input, an active low data input. But I'm going to draw it in here for simplicity's sake, and I maybe talk about the optimization they do to not actually need an inverter. But theoretically, you have an inverted data input here. Okay, so we'll draw a data bar for that input there, and there's your data high input. Okay, but in the textbooks they say, oh, you can't have these both low at the same time, but we know that these are implemented with the cross-coupled NAND gates, so we know that these reset inputs, as long as these are low, when the clock is low, these are going to be high, and so this flip-flop will not change. So the magic happens, of course, when this clock goes high. So what happens when this clock goes high? Okay, well, these inputs here are, these go high. So now the flip-flop is going to look at what its set inputs are doing. Okay, so basically it ends up to, let's say the data is a 1. So if you have data equals 1, right, this is going to be a 1. And so the data bar input will be a 0. So if this is a 1 and this is a 1, this flip-flop is just going to stay the way it was and not affect anything, right? This data being a 0, oh, it's going to go in here and set this flip-flop. Okay, so this will become a 1. This will become a 0, which causes this set input here to be activated because it's active low. Okay, and because this is the set input, it's going to drive the Q to be a 1. Okay, 1. And fortunately, that matches our data input of 1, okay, or the bar data input of 0 comes out over here to be a 1 here, and of course it's going to go to a 0 because it's the Q bar output. Okay, so we have a 0 here, and we still have our 1 that was sitting here from a long time ago because we had, when the clock was 0, it forced this to 1. So this is still a 1. So I have a 1 here and a 0 here, which is a perfectly valid, textbook thing for driving this to a 1 and that to a 0. And everything is just fine and dandy. Okay. Now, another thing they do, though, is what if while the clock is high, the data changes? And then it would mess us all up because then the data changed to 0. Then this thing would flip this over while the clock is high. And of course, you don't want that. So what you do is you be very sneaky. You put in a little AND gate here, right? And you say, oh, if this thing triggers, what it's going to do, whichever one of these guys triggers, it's going to block the other one. So that's kind of the magic of how this D flip-flop works. Okay. So if this guy trips first, okay, it's going to block the clock going into the other one and force this one back to a 1 as if the clock was non-existent, okay? And same thing here, we'll do the same thing here. We'll say if it was the other way around, okay, this will block that guy from activating. And so yeah, that makes it look a little messy. But that's how the flip-flop works, okay? So in our case where we started with data being 0, okay, this output here will go 0, and now it will force this thing to stay at 1, and it will not. If the data changes, this will stay the same. And if the data changes and this is 1, well, it's a set reset flip-flop, so it'll just stick at 0, because this input here is still 1, right? 1 and 1. This thing is still deactivated. It's still a high value here, so it will not change. So that's how this D flip-flop works, okay? So likewise, I guess we could go through the case where you start out when the clock is low and you want the data to be 0. It should be the exact opposite thing, right? So we have data 0, we have our clock is 0 at this point. The data is 0 and bar data is 1, okay? So that with the clock being 0, it's going to force all these outputs here to 1, right? And the Q outputs are going to be zeros. Well, we don't know what the Q outputs are actually, so I won't say that. Okay. The Q outputs, yeah, if this data is 0, the Q output is going to change based on what the data is, but it's not connected to anything, so we don't care, right? Okay. So now we have the clock is 0. It's going to force these resets here to be active, and going to force the Q bar outputs to be 1, and so this output flip-flop just stays in whatever state it was before. All right. So now we're going to drive the clock high. So we'll put a 1 in the clock, right? And these are both 1. So the 1 is going to, these Q bar outputs are both 1. So the clock is just going to go right through this AND gate and release this reset here. And then now the data inputs and the data bar inputs are going to take over and activate one of these flip-flops, okay? So last time we had it, it activated this one. This time, this data input is 0, so it's going to activate this flip-flop here. So this flip-flop here is going to trip, and its Q output is going to become 0, right? This output is going to stay the same because it's got 1 here and 1 here on this active low type SR flip-flop. So this thing isn't going to change. This is just going to stay the same, okay? And so this 0 is going to go over here, and it's going to activate this reset input, or trigger it, or whatever you want to call. And it will flip the Q. Now, because this is the reset, the Q will become 0, and the Q bar will become 1. And lo and behold, now the Q output matches the data input, which is what you want, of course. All right. Now, this 0 will also go over here and force this flip-flop to stay in its reset condition, okay, because it's going to drive a 0 through this AND gate regardless of what happens to the clock, right? It's going to drive this reset input low, which is going to hold this Q bar output to a 1 regardless of what happens to data input from now on, okay? So we don't care what happens to the data input from now on because we're blocking the reset, so it doesn't matter. It can change all at once, okay? If this data input here can change all at once too, all it's going to do is reinforce putting the 0 through there, so we don't care. So that's basically how this flip-flop works, okay? So now we have to debug, okay, why is the one on the actual circuit board not working? Now, we can do a bunch of tests on the circuit board without having to drive the clock and, actually hook the oscilloscope up. There's a bunch of voltmeter tests we can do. Like we can see, is this EF flip-flop working by just grounding and setting these inputs, right? So if we have our clock, we set the clock low, we should be able to see, oh, do we have a 1 here and a 1 here? Okay, are both the inputs to this set reset flip-flop, are both of these 1s? So that's a simple check we can do. we can check that. And if that's the case, then we can just override this with a ground and ground these pins out. It's not going to burn up any circuitry because, again, all these circuits, all the outputs are through 20 kilo ohm resistors. So you can ground them and you can, stick them at +5 and it won't matter. It's not going to hurt anything. So we could just ground this output and see, does this flip-flop? If you ground it, the set pin, um, then you should see the Q output go to 1 and the Q bar output go to 0. Okay. And then if you ground the reset pin, you can see, oh, does the Q output go to 0 and the Q bar output go to 1? So you can test this little flip-flop here like that. Okay. Same thing here. You can go in and test the CD flip-flop, by grounding, whichever one of these inputs you want. Okay, and same thing here, ground one of these inputs here and see that the outputs change like they're supposed to change. Okay, so we can do a bunch of static tests with the thing just sitting there and a voltmeter and a little clip wire to show, to ground inputs or override them. You can put +5 on them and you can ground them, whatever you want to do, and it won't hurt anything. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to stop this video here and then go back to the circuit board, and we'll try this out on the real flip-flop that we're having trouble with. That exec 1 flip-flop it has these 3 little set reset flip-flops internal to it that make up the D flip-flop. So we'll go try that on the real thing next.